So how well do you really know how to identify poison ivy in all of its different forms and habitats? There's a reason I call it the ninja plant, and it's really good at blending in and looking like things that it's not. So I'll tell you a quick story before we go into how to identify it in multiple different variations, forms, and habitats. I have a cousin who knew what poison ivy looked like, or at least he thought he did. He knew it in one particular situation, one form, one habitat. And he lived in an urban setting downtown, and there was a giant vine he discovered growing up the side of his house one year that looked a lot like ivy. So he pulled the vine down, threw it out. A couple days later, he had the most horrendous rash all over his body, and really the next couple of weeks were a nightmare for him. So he knew what poison ivy looked like in its most common form. But do you know the other mysterious ways that it can look like that make it the ninja plant? So poison ivy can be, the most common way we often know it is this little ground cover. You know, it grows kind of 6-8 inches off of the ground. 3 leaves, they're shiny. But did you know that poison ivy can also grow as a shrub and can be, a meter plus tall and look more like a bush, and it can also grow like a vine. And did you know that poison ivy is even contagious in the wintertime? So you're gonna wanna know how to identify it in the winter because the oil can be on the stem and on the berries. So we're gonna jump in a time machine and we're gonna go back in time for a moment and take a look at poison ivy in the wintertime and its berries. And then we're gonna come forward and talk about how to identify it in the summer. And what we're gonna look at right now is poison ivy in the springtime, before it's actually leafed out. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually get poison ivy year round. You can even get it in the wintertime because it's the oil that's on the plant that gets it. Now the leaf has way more oil than the stem does. So most people think about poison ivy in the springtime. Many people recognize it. The leaves are 3, let it be, is the saying that people go. But do you know what poison ivy looks like before it leaves out? Because you can get poison ivy from the branches and the stems coming up. And they're fairly distinct too. So if you look behind me here, it looks pretty unsuspecting, but this is actually full of poison ivy. And if you look over here, these ones with the yellow berries on it, that's the telltale sign, those clusters of yellow berries. But these woody, irregular stems, that's all poison ivy as well. So when you're out on your spring walks in the forest, make sure you're looking for these woody stalks sticking out of the ground. There's usually a lot of them in one place. It's a perennial plant, so the stalks don't die back right to the ground. And then if you see these yellow berries, that's the real telltale sign there of poison ivy in the springtime before it leaves out. And although it's not as oily as the leaves, it still can contract poison ivy to people if you get it on your skin. So there's a little trick for you. All right, so back in the time machine, and we're back looking at a patch of poison ivy on the side of the road here. And here there is, there's a whole bunch of it behind me. And interesting enough, there's multiple plants in here that have 3 leaves to them. This is probably your most classic way that I see poison ivy showing up anyways in this kind of habitat that we're in, the eastern woodlands. And one of the main ID features here, or there's a couple that I'll go over here. One is the irregular leaf pattern. Now, not all of them have this all the time, and that's partly how my cousin got tricked. But if you take a good look at this leaf right here, you'll notice the one side is relatively smooth, almost right up until the end, and the other side is kind of jagged. So that's a key identification of poison ivy, a pretty typical thing. Of course, they are in sets of 3, and you'll notice that the leaves actually kind of come out in clusters. So there's a shoot here with a set of 3, shoot here, shoot there. And then if you go right down to the base, most of the time you'll see a woody base. Although sometimes really young ones, you won't see the woody base either. There's also a bit of a shiny or oily look to the leaf. So all of those things are helpful. But let's go take a look at it growing in amongst some other plants and see if you can spot it, because it's not quite as obvious as this one here. And those are the ones that can really get you and end up with poison ivy on your ankles. Now, just to contrast things a little bit, this spot here is really interesting. So that plant right there is not poison ivy. But if you take a close look at the leaf, it actually looks very similar to poison ivy with that jagged edge, except it doesn't have the leaves of 3. But in amongst it is a ton of poison ivy. And it'd be really easy to look at this patch and actually think you're looking at that 5-leaf plant, the Virginia creeper, and be like, oh, cool. There's a whole bunch of Virginia creeper there, no big deal, and just walk right through it. But you actually miss the poison ivy because it basically camouflages into the Virginia creeper. So this is really interesting. In behind me here, we have 4 different 3-leaf plants that are growing all amongst each other here. They all look a little bit different. and only one of them is poison ivy. And on top of that, we have the one we just talked about a moment ago, the Virginia creeper. And at a quick skim here, you know, if you look down at this one right here, that's actually a little ash sapling coming up. It's 3 leaves, jagged leaves, so looks actually kind of similar to poison ivy. You know, the main lookalikes, it doesn't have that real oily look to it. The leaves are more symmetrical, and the branches break at this opposite arrangement as they come up, like kind of 2 branches side by side as it goes up. The raspberry, just a very different texture altogether that's coming up in there. The Virginia creeper we already talked about, but what's really interesting is you can easily take a look at this, and I mostly just see the creeper and the ash and a bit of the berries, but there's the odd little poison ivy plant hidden in amongst them, and it's actually really hard to spot. Now, before I jump back in the time machine and head off on my next adventure, did you know that there's also several plants that help heal and prevent poison ivy from getting worse? And often they even grow around the poison ivy itself. So here's a quick little pop quiz, and I would love to hear your comments in the comment section below on this video, but this is one of those plants right here. Do you know what that plant is, or what other plants that you can harvest to actually help treat poison ivy? Or do you know any other great home remedies? Because there's a few of them out there that I find work way better than like the anti-itch creams and stuff you buy in the store. So leave your thoughts in the comments, and maybe I'll do a future video about using those plants for herbal medicine for poison ivy treatment down the road. You know, it can take a long time when you're starting out. It often is referred to as the sea of green behind us. You know, a lot of plants actually look similar. But with a few tips and a good mentor and a little bit of dirt time put in, all of a sudden those minute differences start to really jump out at you. Teaching people about the natural world, increasing our nature awareness, and through doing so, increasing our self-reliance and our ability to adapt to this wild kind of world that we live in is one of my biggest passions in the world. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to go deeper in your nature awareness journey as well as your self-reliance journey, you might enjoy checking out some of my more in-depth trainings over at chrisoutdoors.ca. And just keep watching this channel. I try to put stuff out from time to time. So you may want to subscribe to this channel for more stuff coming out. I hope you enjoyed that. Would love to hear from you in the comments below. Okay, cheers.